It was supposed to be just another fiery episode of Hannity, where host Sean Hannity was known for dominating his political opponents with rapid-fire talking points and confident monologues. That night's segment was about law enforcement reform, a topic that had stirred passionate debates across the country. Jasmine Crockett, the freshman congresswoman from Texas, had been invited as the opposing voice, some speculated to be an easy target for Hannity's usual rhetorical jabs. But Crockett had come prepared, her expression calm but focused, waiting for her moment. As the cameras rolled live, Hannity wasted no time. "Congresswoman Crockett," he began, a smirk creeping across his face, "how do you expect Americans to trust your party on crime when democratic cities are overrun with violence?" The tone was confrontational, laced with accusation. Hannity leaned forward, clearly expecting a defensive response. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She smiled slightly, adjusted her mic, and replied, "Maybe they'd trust us more if we stopped pretending policing was the same as justice." The studio went silent for a split second. Hannity blinked, clearly thrown off. His co-host shifted in her seat but said nothing. And then the comments section exploded. The moment Jasmine Crockett delivered her sharp one-liner, the energy in the studio shifted. It wasn't loud, it was the kind of silence that weighs heavy. Hannity, known for his quick comebacks and combative style, opened his mouth as if to respond, but hesitated. His co-host, visibly taken aback, glanced at him, then at Crockett, choosing not to interject. It was as if no one expected her to flip the script so effortlessly. Jasmine, noticing the stunned reaction, leaned in slightly. "You asked about violence," she continued smoothly. "Let's be honest, when people are starving, when they're ignored, when justice is uneven, that's not just a Democrat problem. That's an American problem." Hannity tried to regain control. "So, you're blaming society for crime now," he said, trying to sound firm, but the edge in his voice had dulled. "I'm blaming hypocrisy," Crockett shot back without missing a beat. "You scream law and order when it's convenient, but go silent when it's lawless in a boardroom or a Capitol hallway." That line landed hard. The control room cut briefly to a wide shot, revealing the audience behind the cameras, many now exchanging glances. The co-host cleared her throat but remained wordless. She seemed to know better than to interrupt a moment that was quickly going viral. The segment was only minutes in, but it already felt like the ground had shifted beneath Hannity's feet. He tapped his pen against the desk, a subtle tell that regular viewers had learned to recognize. He was rattled. "Congresswoman, with all due respect," he began again, this time more cautiously, "are you suggesting Republicans have no concern for justice?" Crockett didn't even blink. "I'm suggesting justice shouldn't depend on your party, your zip code, or your tax bracket," she replied, her voice unwavering. "And if you really cared about crime, you'd be just as loud about corruption as you are about carjackings." That hit like a hammer. The chat feed on the network's live stream started flooding with reactions. On Twitter, clips were already circulating with captions like, "Jasmine Crockett just dismantled Hannity in real time. Hannity tried to change course." Okay, he said, attempting a forced chuckle, "you clearly came ready for a fight." "No, Sean," Crockett said, leaning forward with calm intensity. "I came ready for facts. If that feels like a fight, maybe you've been talking too long without hearing the other side." The co-host finally chimed in, but only to stammer, "Well, I think we can all agree this is a passionate debate." Jasmine turned to her, smiling politely. "Passion isn't the problem. Silence in the face of truth is." The studio's air felt thick. And Sean Hannity, for once, had nothing. For a show that thrived on fast-paced interruptions and partisan zingers, this segment had taken a surreal turn. Viewers across the country could feel it. Jasmine Crockett wasn't just holding her ground, she was dominating it with poise and pointed clarity. The control room, behind the scenes, scrambled. Producers exchanged hushed comments through earpieces. The live director gestured for tighter shots of Hannity, hoping a close-up would reassert his authority. But it only made the contrast more apparent. He looked visibly unsettled, while Crockett radiated calm conviction. Sean leaned forward again, more serious now. "Let's talk solutions then," he said with a forced smile. "You say the justice system is broken. What are Democrats actually doing to fix it, besides defunding police and defending chaos?" It was a classic pivot, try to corner the opponent with a loaded generalization. But Crockett, unfazed, responded deliberately. "You want solutions? Try this: fund communities with the same urgency we fund incarceration. Train officers to de-escalate before they escalate. And hold them accountable when they don't." She turned slightly toward the camera. "What we defund are broken systems. What we defend are lives." The audience behind the scenes murmured. Even the crew, usually neutral, seemed moved. Hannity attempted a smirk, but his eyes betrayed discomfort. He motioned to his co-host, clearly hoping for backup. "You want to jump in here?" he asked. She shifted awkwardly, then offered a half-hearted reply. "Well, there's obviously a lot of emotion here, but we also have to respect law enforcement," Crockett cut in gently but firmly. "Respect isn't the issue. Accountability is. I don't fear the badge, I fear the silence around it when it's misused." The tension in the studio reached a new level. Hannity's usual rhythm was gone. His voice lowered, not out of control but caution. "So are you saying police are inherently unjust?" he asked. Crockett raised her eyebrow ever so slightly. "I'm saying justice that's inconsistent isn't justice at all. It's privilege. And it's time we stop confusing the two." The co-host finally looked down at her notes, avoiding eye contact altogether. Sean's smile had faded entirely. For the first time in the episode, he seemed unsure whether to continue, or cut to commercial. And viewers across the country were glued to every second. Back in the studio, the silence spoke louder than any commercial break ever could. Hannity tapped his notepad nervously, searching for a way to recover the narrative. His team had crafted this segment to challenge Crockett, paint her as radical, evasive, too new to handle the big stage. But instead, she had flipped the script entirely. And now, the host found himself cornered on his own turf. "So what's the endgame here, Congresswoman?" Hannity asked, his tone now almost defensive. "If you say the system is broken, do you believe we tear it all down and start over?" Jasmine didn't pause. She knew the trick in the question, a false binary, meant to cast reformers as destroyers. "No, Sean," she said, eyes locked with his. "We don't tear it all down, we finally build it up right. From the foundation. Not just for the wealthy. Not just for the powerful. For everybody." The co-host started to speak but then stopped herself. There was nothing she could add that wouldn't sound rehearsed. "And let's be real," Crockett continued. "You talk about crime like it's only in the streets. But how often do your shows cover wage theft? Corporate fraud? Or insider trading that tanks pensions?" Hannity opened his mouth, but she didn't give him the chance this time. "You don't. Because it doesn't fit the narrative. Because it doesn't scare your viewers the same way. But those are crimes too, ones that destroy families without ever pulling a trigger." The audience in the studio now stirred noticeably. A few heads nodded. Someone coughed in the back, a rare sound in the otherwise controlled, quiet environment of a live Fox broadcast. The live chat on streaming platforms surged. Phrases like "she's cooking" and "never seen Hannity this quiet" climbed to the top. Hannity leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, jaw tight. He glanced at the clock, too early to cut, too late to steer things back. "Well," he said finally, "you certainly came with a message tonight." Jasmine offered a small, courteous smile. "No, Sean. I came with the truth. If that feels like a message, maybe that says more about what this show is used to." Boom. Another silence. One that no commercial break could fix. By now, the dynamic had fully reversed. Sean Hannity, the veteran broadcaster with years of debate under his belt, looked like the guest on his own show, outmaneuvered, outpaced, and clearly out of his element. Jasmine Crockett, on the other hand, remained composed, her voice steady and deliberate. She wasn't raising her voice. She didn't need to. Every line landed with precision, and every counterpoint drew the audience deeper into her corner. Hannity cleared his throat again, clearly buying time. "Look," he began, shifting gears, "I think we can agree that America needs improvement. But wouldn't you admit that some on your side go too far, calling for things like abolishing ICE or police departments entirely?" Crockett nodded slowly, as if giving him credit for trying. "There are extreme voices everywhere," she said. "But here's the difference: when someone far left says something wild, it's debated. When someone far right says something dangerous, it becomes policy." The co-host blinked, then looked down again, visibly uncomfortable. Hannity forced a grin, but it didn't land. "That's a bit of a stretch," he said, trying to brush it off. Crockett turned slightly in her seat. "Is it?" she asked. Election denial became a movement. Book bans became law. Voter suppression isn't a conspiracy, it's written into legislation in states across the country. Now the camera cut briefly to the co-host, who was completely still, just listening, saying nothing. A stark contrast to her usual interruptions. Crockett went on. "I'm not here to defend every slogan. I'm here to defend people who've been ignored by this system for generations. People who keep hearing, 'Just wait,' while watching others get justice overnight." The chat feed on Fox's live stream was chaotic, half outraged, half impressed. Twitter/X was ablaze. Clips of her quotes were already being shared with captions like, "Crockett just redefined the rules of cable news." Hannity took one last shot. "So what, we just turn everything upside down to make it fair?" Crockett looked at him, straight-faced. "No, Sean. We turn it upright. Because for some of us, it's been upside down since the beginning." And with that, the segment was no longer a debate. It was a reckoning. The temperature in the studio had changed completely. Not because of raised voices or chaos, but because of clarity. Jasmine Crockett wasn't just holding her own, she was dismantling decades of political deflection with measured conviction. Producers backstage began frantically debating whether to cut early or stay with the segment. But the numbers were clear, viewer engagement had spiked. Cutting now would only fuel the narrative that Hannity had been outmatched. So the cameras stayed on. Hannity, visibly frustrated but still composed, tried to salvage the conversation. "You talk a lot about fairness, but let's be real, this country has come a long way. Aren't you ignoring the progress we've made?" Crockett smiled softly, but her eyes remained locked in. "Progress is real, Sean. But so is pain. And telling people they should be grateful for progress while they're still bleeding isn't justice, it's gaslighting." That line landed hard. Even in the control room, one of the producers reportedly mouthed, "Wow." Hannity leaned back, visibly uneasy. The power dynamic had fully shifted, and everyone watching could feel it. The co-host finally spoke again, cautiously. "But Congresswoman, don't you think statements like that are too harsh? Some might say they divide more than they heal." Crockett turned to her, her tone never harsh, just firm. "Truth doesn't divide. It reveals. And maybe what's uncomfortable right now isn't what I'm saying, it's that for once, someone's saying it here." The audience behind the cameras was dead silent. Not out of boredom, but awe. Hannity's face twitched ever so slightly. He reached for his coffee mug, buying another second of time, then looked into the camera. "We'll have to leave it there," he said tightly. "Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, thank you for your passionate input." But before the segment could end, Jasmine added one final, piercing line, "Anytime, Sean. Truth has a funny way of showing up, even in places it's not invited." Cut. And just like that, the most talked about moment of the week in political media wasn't a scandal, a poll, or a press release, it was a one-liner that left Sean Hannity silent. The moment the cameras cut, the tension in the studio snapped like a rubber band. Hannity pulled off his earpiece with more force than usual, giving a tight smile to the crew, but saying nothing. His co-host offered a half-hearted nod to Jasmine Crockett, then quickly turned to check her phone. But Crockett? She sat still, calm, collected, scrolling through her notifications, watching as her words reverberated across social media. Clips of the exchange were everywhere within minutes, stitched with hashtags like hashtag Crockett claps back, hashtag Hannity speechless, and hashtag truth in prime time. Conservative pundits scrambled to spin the moment, calling her disrespectful, too radical, or just playing to the cameras. But the damage was done. Even some right-leaning viewers admitted on forums that Crockett had come in with substance, not slogans. In progressive circles, she was hailed as a rising star. Meanwhile, in the Fox News editorial meeting that followed, there were no congratulations, just questions. Who booked her? Why didn't we cut sooner? How did we not prep for this? Some producers privately admitted they'd underestimated her. But Jasmine Crockett wasn't focused on that. As she walked out of the studio and into the warm New York night, her team handed her a phone already buzzing with interviews, article requests, and praise from across the political spectrum. She turned to her chief of staff. "They thought I came to play," she said, smiling slightly. "I came to shift the conversation." Back in his dressing room, Sean Hannity sat alone, watching the replay. Over and over again. Searching for a moment where he could have regained control, only to realize, painfully, that sometimes one line is enough to undo a whole narrative. And on that night, Jasmine Crockett had delivered it. The fallout from the viral showdown between Jasmine Crockett and Sean Hannity wasn't just digital, it hit the political media landscape like a thunderclap. By the next morning, major outlets had picked it up. Freshman Congresswoman silences Fox host in stunning exchange. Jasmine Crockett's mic drop moment dominates the political discourse. Hannity caught off guard in primetime clash. Progressives hailed Crockett as a truth teller, someone who came into the lion's den and didn't just survive, but made the lion blink. Young voters, especially women of color, flooded social platforms with support, calling her a new voice of moral clarity in a sea of political theater. Even neutral journalists had to admit, she didn't come to pander. She came to reframe the entire conversation. But the deeper impact wasn't just viral buzz, it was how the moment forced networks, even conservative ones, to reckon with something uncomfortable, that maybe, just maybe, the usual tactics, interruptions, soundbites, distractions, were finally starting to lose their power when met with calm, focused truth. That night, clips of her lines were remixed into reels, quoted in Instagram captions, dissected on Reddit. One particularly powerful quote, "Truth doesn't divide. It reveals," was printed onto t-shirts by the weekend. Republican strategists scrambled to downplay the moment. A few tried labeling Crockett a performer, but the clip itself worked against that narrative. She hadn't yelled. She hadn't deflected. She'd out-argued a man with decades of primetime experience, on his own show, by sticking to the facts and refusing to be boxed in. In Capitol Hill hallways, murmurs spread. Reporters asked whether this marked a turning point, not just for Crockett, but for how Democrats engage with media giants like Fox News. Later that week, during a press scrum, a journalist asked her what made her stay so composed under pressure. Crockett smiled. "Pressure is nothing new to people like me. The only thing different was the camera." The response was quintessential Crockett, grounded, unshaken, and real. Meanwhile, Hannity addressed the incident once, briefly and vaguely, on a later episode, referring to it as a lively debate that got some attention. But he never replayed the clip. Not once. His silence said it all. Because in the world of political TV, it's rare for a single sentence to stop a machine as big as Hannity. But Jasmine Crockett had done just that. And now, no one could ignore her. Weeks passed, but the impact of Jasmine Crockett's takedown on Hannity didn't fade, it expanded. Political roundtables, podcast hosts, and editorial writers kept circling back to that moment. Not because it was loud, but because it was real. She hadn't relied on slogans. She didn't resort to shouting. She didn't storm off the set. Instead, Crockett had delivered a masterclass in composure, clarity, and conviction, in a space designed to overwhelm and discredit. And that, more than anything, made it unforgettable. Back in Washington, her office saw a surge in calls, messages, and volunteers. Young interns spoke of being inspired to pursue law, policy, or advocacy after seeing her. Teachers played the segment in high school civics classes to show the power of restraint and substance. But the most telling change? The way networks booked guests. Suddenly, there was hesitation about underestimating young progressives. There was a quiet, behind-the-scenes reckoning, maybe the old playbook wasn't enough anymore. Backstage at MSNBC, CNN, and yes, even Fox, producers asked the same question in meeting after meeting: do we have anyone who can sit across from someone like her and not fold? Meanwhile, Crockett remained grounded. She didn't bask in the spotlight, she redirected it. She used the moment to push legislation, highlight grassroots organizers, and mentor young staffers who saw in her what they rarely saw on national television: a black woman speaking truth to power, not to go viral, but because that's what she'd always done. In an interview weeks later, when asked if she thought about that one-liner, the sentence that stunned Hannity and left his co-host silent, Jasmine Crockett smiled softly. "I didn't say it to silence him," she replied. "I said it because someone at home needed to hear it. Maybe for the first time." And that's what changed everything. Not the fact that Hannity was silenced. But that someone, somewhere, heard the truth they'd been waiting to hear. On the biggest stage. From someone who refused to be small.